G'day guys, and today, an amendment. Yesterday I uploaded a video saying it was the Australian government that had blocked various websites within Australia, and I was totally wrong about this. It was actually the internet service providers like Telstra, Vodafone, Optus and things like that. To be perfectly honest with you guys, this is a result of my own personal bias. When I see things like censorship and blocking and things like that, I automatically associate that with the government rather than private companies. And that is how that mess occurred. So sorry about all that, I jumped the gun for sure, but now let's get on with what actually is occurring. So several websites including 4chan have been blocked by major Australian telcos for continuing to host footage of the Christchurch terrorist attack. So we have various websites like 4chan, 8chan, Vote, Zero Hedge, Liveleak, and I believe Kiwi Farms is also blocked, but I need to double check that. So in a statement from Telstra, their IT executive said the following: "We understand this may inconvenience some legitimate users of these sites, but these are extreme circumstances and we feel this is the right thing to do." Well, straight away we can see, anyone with half a brain can see that there is no objectivity in that statement. It's just a feelings-based statement. It is likely a PR move. You know, things could get whipped up, frenzied mobs and things like that, and pressuring advertisers, and you know, there could be a lot of money at risk, so I can understand why they do this. I just don't think it's the right thing to do, and I'll get into that a little later on. We also have a statement from Vodafone. So they said while blocking requests normally came from the courts or law enforcement agencies, this was, quote, "an extreme case which we think requires an extraordinary response. While there were discussions at the industry level about this issue, this is a decision Vodafone Australia came to independently," the spokesperson said. Optus says it has blocked the domains after reflecting on community expectations. So in my mind, it's definitely a PR move. They just don't want to get in trouble when people get whipped up into a hate mob, because people don't understand how free speech and discourse works and the dichotomy between speech and violence nowadays. It is odd, however, when you have a look at what has been banned, this particular gruesome video, and you compare that to the various numerous videos you have of Islamic assassinations and killings and things like that have always been up on the internet for years, and no one seems to have a problem with that. But as soon as it's not an Islamic problem, you're allowed to talk about it. It's just an interesting thing. It exposes the double standard. Look, everyone already innately knows this. There is a double standard between how Islamic violence is treated and how white violence is treated. It would take you about 10 seconds flat to find ISIS execution videos on the internet, honor killings and things like that, and no one seems to find this objectionable because, well, it would be a really bad PR move to do this, because there would be hordes of brainwashed progressives who would come down on you like a ton of bricks. So the situation being as it is that it is the ISPs, not the government, blocking people. I do now, with the benefit of hindsight, believe it is the ISPs doing this. There is no backroom or public pressure from the government, because if they were going to censor things, they'd come out and be very vocal about it, to be very virtue signaling, and also there's an election coming up, so maybe they thought it would be a bad move, but if they thought it was going to be a good move, they'd go all in right now. So the fact that it is ISPs censoring people does not matter so much as the government doing it, because your relationship with the ISP is entirely voluntary. If you do not appreciate the fact that, say, Telstra is banning 4chan because you're a masterful shitposter and you're being denied your fundamental rights as an Australian, well, you can just leave Telstra and jump on someone else, some other ISP that doesn't block 4chan. It would be another matter entirely if it was the government doing the censoring, because your relationship with the government is not voluntary at all. When the government asks you to jump, if you don't jump, you go to jail, at the very least. The points I made in my video, my deleted video, still stand. However, I don't believe any discourse should be, restricted at all. We need to discuss these ideas, because if we can't discuss ideas, well, there's only one other way to solve our disputes, and that's through violence, as we've seen. Clearly, this shooter, this madman, this psychopath, didn't think words were going to solve anything, so what else can he do? Well, he has to go out and be violent. I want you to consider for me an analogy. Consider a romantic relationship between a man or a woman, and within this relationship, the couple is not allowed to solve their disputes through words. Well, what happens when, say for example, the woman is upset with the man because he doesn't take out the trash, or the man is upset with the woman because she doesn't have sex with him, or whatever stereotypical problem you want to put in there? Well, if they're not allowed to talk about their problems, how do they get their way? Well, there is the possibility that no one gets their way, and there's this enormous sense of resentment, which can then lead on to the other situation, which is violence. If the woman wants the man to take out the trash, she just hits him until he's so afraid that he doesn't. And if the man wants the woman to have sex with him, he just grabs her and chokes her out until she passes out, and then he does what he wants. Now, if you explain this situation to people, they understand it, and they would say, that's crazy, that's wrong, of course we need to discuss issues within a relationship, but for some reason this doesn't transfer to society as a whole. And perhaps it's because people don't look at society as a network of relationships. Well, what happens if we take our example of the romantic relationship, where no one can talk to one another about their problems, and expand it to the relationship network of society as a whole? Well, now we have two groups, and these two groups have a certain issue with one another, maybe over a certain cultural practice. Now, if these two groups can't discuss their issues, well, how are they going to enforce their preferences? Well, exactly the same way as before. They're going to have to use violence. As I've said many times before, there certainly is a dichotomy of dispute resolution. You can either use words, or you can use fists. There really is no in between. What really strikes me as odd, though, is that when you encounter someone who wants to censor everyone else, whether it's the government or some jackboot-licking authoritarian or an ISP or whatever, you encounter this interesting little viewpoint they have. Obviously, they're going to censor people with extremely objectionable views. They're not just going to go around censoring themselves, for starters. That would be strange. And it strikes me as really odd, because if something is really, really wrong, it is painfully obviously wrong, isn't it easy to disprove that idea? I mean, doesn't that make it all the easier to just talk about why it's wrong? I mean, if something is really, really bad, really self-evidently bad, then why do you need to censor it? Surely people can just speak their minds and make themselves look like idiots. What I would suggest is that you give these people a pedestal and the biggest microphone you can find and let them speak, because by letting people speak, that is the easiest way to go about shredding their ideas, because they reveal all the weak points in their arguments and things like that. I'm not sure whether I should attribute this to intellectual laziness, or a lust for power, a desire to dominate other people, or a sort of knee-jerk reaction where no one nowadays thinks their feelings should be hurt. But this introduces a really interesting conundrum, as Jordan Peterson has pointed out most humorously on his interview, the famous Channel 4 interview, in that in order to have a conversation with someone, you have to be willing to offend them, especially if you want to talk about something important like politics or the way people behave. If we return to our example of the couple who aren't allowed to discuss their issues with one another, we can see this play out in fullness. Now, as you'll probably recall, the woman is upset or resentful with the man for not taking out the trash. Now, in order to see her preferences fulfilled, she has to be willing to offend him in some minor capacity. There is the implied insult that he's lazy or he doesn't care about her and that sort of thing, depending on how far you want to go with it and depending on what the man is like. Perhaps he's very easily offended. But the core issue, the core point that I want to make is, if you want to criticize things, you have to be willing to offend people. If you want to talk about important things, you have to be willing to offend people. Otherwise, you're just going to have the most boring conversations, just endless small talk about the weather. Or maybe you can't talk about the weather because, rainy days upset some people because they can't go outside and stuff like that. You're just going to end up with this world, and on paper it might sound very nice to people where no one gets offended and stuff like that, but you're going to be constantly tyrannized and constantly at rack within your own mind, constantly under anxiety because you're so worried about offending people. No, absolutely not. I don't think anyone should live this way. I think we should be willing to offend people, but we should also be willing to forgive people, of course. And with that, I realise I'm getting a bit off topic. I wholeheartedly disagree with the actions of these Australian ISPs. I don't believe we should be censoring anyone at all from any kind of discussion within society. Think about what occurs when you censor someone. Do they stop thinking certain ideas? Of course not. They just go elsewhere, and all this does is create secluded echo chambers where people can't be challenged with new information and they become more and more ardent in their beliefs until eventually we see something horrifying, as we are currently seeing in Christchurch. I am a firm believer that sunlight is the best disinfectant. We should have a robust and thorough verbal discourse within our society where ideas can be brought up, challenged, critiqued, ripped apart, and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, Australian society at large seems to be not very supportive of this idea. Again, they seem to be supportive of the idea that their feelings shouldn't be heard, or that they shouldn't be exposed to nasty ideas, and that other people should take care of it for them. That's the intellectual laziness I mentioned. I will do my part in reversing this trend, in changing the paradigm, and hopefully ushering a new era of freedom for Australia. But in the meantime, thanks for watching my video, and have a good one.